They laughed at the PC. 15 years later, they were gone. They were the second biggest computer company on Earth, and they laughed at the personal computer. In the 1980s, Digital Equipment Corporation stood as a titan of engineering power. Their machines ran laboratories, universities, banks, and governments. Their founders were respected, their culture was proud, their technology was elegant, and within 15 years, they were gone. This is the story of how brilliance turned into blindness, and how one of the most powerful computer companies in the world underestimated a machine small enough to sit on a desk. They built the machines that ran the world, but refused to believe the world would shrink. Digital Equipment Corporation, better known as DEC, was founded in 1957 by Ken Olsen and Harlan Anderson. At a time when computers filled rooms and required corporate budgets, DEC pioneered something radical: the minicomputer. Smaller, cheaper, more accessible machines that could be used by engineers and researchers without needing a Fortune 500 budget. Their PDP and later VAX systems were revolutionary. Universities loved them. Research labs depended on them. Engineers admired them. DEC wasn't just selling hardware, they were selling power, control, and technical superiority. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, DEC had become the second largest computer company in the world, behind IBM. They were worth billions. Their growth was explosive. Their culture was engineering first, deeply technical, intensely proud. And that pride mattered. What if the smartest people in the room are the last to see the shift? When the personal computer began to emerge, many inside DEC saw it as a toy, a hobbyist's experiment, something for small businesses, maybe for home use, but not serious computing, not real computing. Ken Olsen himself famously dismissed the idea that individuals would want computers in their homes. From DEC's perspective, computing was centralized. It required powerful machines, controlled environments, trained professionals. Why would anyone need their own computer? Meanwhile, companies like Apple were exploring consumer-friendly machines, and IBM, the giant DEC had learned to compete with, entered the personal computer market in 1981. But here's the critical difference. IBM made a decision that would reshape the entire industry. They outsourced key components, including the operating system. That decision opened the door for Microsoft to build a software empire and for clone manufacturers to flood the market with compatible machines. The center of gravity began to shift, away from proprietary hardware and toward open ecosystems and software control. DEC didn't see that shift as existential. They thought the future would scale up. It scaled down. DEC's strength had always been tightly integrated systems, hardware designed with precision, software optimized specifically for their machines. Their VAX systems were engineering masterpieces. They delivered power and reliability in a way PCs simply couldn't, at least at first. But something subtle was happening. Personal computers were improving rapidly. Performance was doubling. Costs were falling. Software ecosystems were forming. Developers were building applications that ran across standardized platforms. The PC wasn't just getting better, it was becoming a networked ecosystem, and DEC's model was the opposite. Their systems were proprietary, expensive, locked into their own architecture. They controlled everything, and that control had once been their advantage. Now it was friction. When your business model depends on complexity, simplicity looks like a threat. Throughout the 1980s, DEC tried to respond, but never fully committed. They launched their own personal computers. They experimented with workstations. They even built networking technologies that were ahead of their time. In fact, DEC engineers contributed to early internet infrastructure, Ethernet development traces partly through Xerox and DEC collaboration. They had the talent, they had the technical vision, but strategically they were conflicted. Supporting PCs too aggressively would cannibalize their profitable mini-computer business. Fully embracing open standards would weaken their proprietary advantage. Shifting to a software-led ecosystem would undermine their hardware margins. So they hesitated, and hesitation in a platform shift is lethal. The market doesn't wait for internal debates. By the late 1980s, the PC revolution was no longer a curiosity, it was unstoppable. Businesses were standardizing around IBM-compatible systems. Microsoft's operating systems were spreading everywhere. Software vendors were building for mass markets, not proprietary silos. DEC's high-end systems still had performance advantages, but the gap was shrinking fast, and customers were noticing something important. PC networks could approximate the power of mini-computers at a fraction of the cost. Instead of one expensive centralized machine, companies could deploy distributed computing across dozens or hundreds of PCs. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't as pure from an engineering standpoint, but it worked, and it was cheaper. Perfection loses to good enough when scale enters the room. DEC struggled with internal culture clashes. The company that had once thrived on innovation became layered with bureaucracy. Decision-making slowed. Strategic clarity faded. They attempted to diversify. They invested heavily in new chip architectures. They developed the Alpha processor, a technically superior microprocessor that many engineers considered brilliant. But brilliance wasn't enough. The industry had already standardized around Intel and Microsoft. Compatibility mattered more than raw performance. Ecosystems mattered more than elegance. And DEC was fighting the tide instead of riding it. When the standard wins, the better product doesn't matter. Revenue began to stall. Margins tightened. Layoffs started. Something almost unthinkable in a company that had once symbolized stability and growth. Ken Olsen was eventually forced out in 1992. The founder who had built the company into a global powerhouse was removed as DEC searched for a way to survive. But structural decline is hard to reverse. The company that once defined the mini-computer era now faced an identity crisis. They weren't dominant in PCs. They weren't dominant in software. They weren't controlling the new platform layer. They were trapped between eras. They didn't die because they were incompetent. They died because they were early to one wave and late to the next. In 1998, Digital Equipment Corporation was acquired by Compaq for roughly $9.6 billion. It was one of the largest mergers in tech history at the time. And then, just a few years later, Compaq itself was acquired by Hewlett-Packard. DEC, the second largest computer company in the world at its peak, disappeared into corporate consolidation. Its brand vanished. Its culture dissolved. Its legacy became a footnote. But the lesson is enormous. DEC was not foolish. They were not technologically behind. They had extraordinary engineers. They built some of the most advanced systems of their era. What they underestimated was the shift of power. The industry was moving from hardware dominance to software ecosystems, from centralized systems to distributed networks, from proprietary control to open standards, from vertical integration to modular platforms. IBM almost made the same mistake, but their outsourcing decision unintentionally positioned Microsoft to control the software layer. DEC tried to protect its hardware kingdom, and in doing so, it missed the software revolution. Control feels safe until the market chooses openness. There's something almost tragic about DEC's story because it wasn't a dramatic scandal. It wasn't fraud. It wasn't collapse through incompetence. It was strategic misalignment during a paradigm shift. The company that once democratized computing through mini-computers failed to see that democratization would continue, all the way down to the individual desk. They couldn't imagine a world where small, cheap, imperfect machines would outcompete their refined systems. But that's exactly what happened. History has repeated this pattern again and again. Mainframes to mini-computers to PCs, PCs to mobile devices, on-premise servers to cloud platforms. Each shift rewards those who embrace the new layer of power and punishes those who defend the old one too long. DEC built the future once, then they defended it, and the future moved on. If IBM's story is about giving away control of software, DEC's story is about refusing to let go of hardware control at all. Two different strategies. Same underlying mistake. They underestimated where value would concentrate next. And when value moves, gravity follows. The second biggest computer company in the world didn't fall because their machines stopped working. They fell because their worldview did. And in technology, the moment your worldview freezes, the clock starts ticking. If you want to understand how software quietly became the real center of power, and how another giant made a different but equally costly decision, the next story might surprise you even more.